The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the windswept plains of Wyoming Territory as Olivia Matthews stared at the empty garden bed behind her small homestead, tears stinging her eyes. The year was 1878, and just like her womb, the soil had failed to bear fruit once again. She kicked at the dry earth, remembering the whispers that followed her through town, the pitying glances from women with children clinging to their skirts. Barren, they called her, both her land and her body, as if her worth as a woman could be measured only by what she could produce. "You're wasting your time out here," Olivia muttered to herself, repeating the cruel words that Martha Wilkins had spoken at the general store in Snake River just yesterday. "A woman who can't have children has no business pretending she can grow anything else." Olivia wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. At 28, she'd long ago given up the hope of children after 5 years of marriage to Frank had yielded nothing but monthly disappointment. But when Frank died 2 years ago in a mining accident, leaving her with this struggling homestead, she'd thrown herself into making this patch of Wyoming soil produce something, anything to prove she wasn't completely worthless. A cloud of dust on the horizon caught her attention. A rider was approaching from the direction of town. She squinted against the setting sun, recognizing the broad-shouldered silhouette of Jacob Sullivan, her nearest neighbor and the one man in Snake River who still treated her with genuine kindness rather than condescension. "Evening, Mrs. Matthews," Jake called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. At 32, he was considered one of the more eligible bachelors in the county, though he seemed in no hurry to marry. His ranch, 3 miles east of Olivia's homestead, was modest but prosperous, unlike her failing efforts. "Mr. Sullivan," she nodded, quickly composing herself. "What brings you this way?" "Thought I'd bring you these," he said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Seeds, different variety than what you've been trying, might do better in this soil." Olivia stared at the package, unsure whether to feel grateful or insulted. "That's kind of you, but as everyone in town will tell you, nothing grows under my care." Jake's expression softened as he looked at her, then at the barren garden bed she'd been working. "That's not what I see, Mrs. Matthews. I see a woman working harder than most men I know, against odds that would have broken lesser folks long ago." "Well, you're in the minority with that opinion," she replied, but accepted the package nonetheless. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Olivia quickly pulled away, uncomfortable with the warmth that spread through her at his touch. "Town's preparing for the harvest fair next month," Jake mentioned, changing the subject. "You planning to enter anything?" Olivia laughed bitterly. "And give everyone another reason to mock me? I think not," Jake frowned. "Those people have nothing better to do than gossip. You shouldn't let them dictate what you do or don't do. Easy for you to say, you haven't heard what they say about me." She looked away, embarrassed by how much it still hurt. "Actually, I have." His voice had hardened. "And I've told a few of them exactly what I think about folks who judge a woman for things beyond her control." Olivia looked up at him in surprise. "You defended me." "Of course I did." "It's not right what they say." He gestured toward her garden. "And for what it's worth, I think you're underestimating yourself. This soil isn't easy. Took me 3 years to figure out what would grow on my place." She studied him for a moment, wondering if he was just being kind or if he truly believed what he was saying. "Well, thank you for the seeds, Mr. Sullivan. I appreciate the gesture, even if it is futile." "Jacob," he corrected her. "After 2 years of being neighbors, I think we can use first names, don't you?" A small smile crossed her lips. "Then thank you, Jacob, and I'm Olivia." "Olivia," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart beat a little faster. "Give those seeds a try. And think about the fair. Sometimes the best way to silence critics is to show them they're wrong." After he left, Olivia stood looking at the package in her hands. The harvest fair had been a tradition in Snake River since before she'd arrived as a new bride 7 years ago. Every September, the townspeople gathered to display their best crops, preserves, and handcrafts. She'd never entered, partly because Frank hadn't believed in such frivolous nonsense and partly because she'd never had anything worth showing. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a spark of defiance. Perhaps Jacob was right. Perhaps the best revenge would be success. The next morning, Olivia rose before dawn and headed straight to her garden. She carefully opened the package Jacob had given her, finding several varieties of vegetable seeds with handwritten notes about each one. "Sugar pumpkins plant in full sun, need less water than you'd think," she read aloud. "Butternut squash hardy and forgiving." She smiled at that last note, wondering if he'd chosen it specifically for her situation. She worked the soil until her back ached and her hands were blistered, mixing in the manure she'd collected from the 2 milk cows she kept. By midday, she had planted all the seeds, marking each row carefully with small wooden stakes. "Lord knows if this will work," she murmured, "but at least no one can say I didn't try." Over the next few days, she established a routine. Up before dawn to tend to her animals and check on her garden, then working on mending, preserving the milk from her cows into butter and cheese, and keeping her small homestead in order. Every evening, she'd return to the garden, watering it carefully and watching for any signs of growth. A week later, she was rewarded with the first tiny green shoots poking through the soil. She knelt beside them, hardly daring to touch the delicate stems. "Well, I'll be," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. She was still kneeling there when she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Jacob had taken to stopping by every few days, ostensibly to check on her progress, though Olivia suspected he was simply making sure she was all right on her own, something she both appreciated and resented. "They're coming up," she announced before he even dismounted. Unable to keep the excitement from her voice, Jacob swung down from his horse, a wide grin on his face. "I knew they would." He walked over and crouched beside her, studying the tiny sprouts. "See? Told you this soil just needed the right match. It's just sprouts," she cautioned, trying to temper her own enthusiasm. "They could still wither tomorrow." "They could," he agreed, "or they could flourish. Either way, you got them to sprout, which is more than you had yesterday." Their eyes met, and Olivia felt that same strange warmth spreading through her chest. Jacob had the kindest eyes she'd ever seen, deep brown with flecks of gold that caught the sunlight. She looked away quickly, focusing back on the plants. "I need to get to town for supplies," she said, changing the subject, "running low on flour and such." "I'm heading that way myself," he offered. "Could give you a ride if you'd like. Save your wagon the trip." She hesitated. Riding with Jacob would mean sitting close to him, something that suddenly seemed both appealing and terrifying. "That's kind of you, but I can manage." "I'm sure you can," he said, and there was that look again, the one that suggested he saw more in her than she saw in herself. "But why should you have to? That's what neighbors are for." An hour later, they were riding towards Snake River, Olivia perched somewhat awkwardly behind Jacob on his horse. She'd insisted on riding astride rather than side saddle, practicality overriding propriety, but that meant she had to hold onto his waist to keep her balance. Every time the horse's gait caused her to tighten her grip, she felt the solid warmth of him beneath her hands. "You know," Jacob said over his shoulder, "my mother always said you can tell a lot about a person by what they choose to grow." "Is that so?" Olivia asked, grateful for the distraction from her own confusing thoughts. "And what do my fledgling vegetables say about me?" "Well, pumpkins take patience. They need time and space to sprawl, and butternut squash, that's practical but a bit stubborn, won't be rushed but worth the wait," she laughed. "You make it sound as if I chose them when you're the one who provided the seeds." "I gave you options," he corrected. "You chose which ones to plant and where and how. Those were your decisions." As they approached town, Olivia felt the familiar tension settling into her shoulders. Snake River wasn't large, just a main street with the essential businesses that served the surrounding ranches and farms, but it was big enough for gossip to spread like wildfire. Sure enough, as they rode up to the general store, she noticed several women outside who immediately turned to watch them arrive. Mrs. Wilkins, who'd been so cruel at the store last week, nudged Mrs. Bennett, and both women eyed Olivia with undisguised curiosity as Jacob helped her down from the horse. "Ignore them," Jacob murmured, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Inside the store, the owner, Mr. Peterson, greeted them with surprise. Mrs. Matthews, Mr. Sullivan, don't often see you two together. Just being neighborly, Jacob said easily. Mrs. Matthews needed supplies. While Olivia gathered her items, she couldn't help overhearing Mrs. Wilkins and Mrs. Bennet entering the store, their voices deliberately loud enough to carry. Riding together, bold as brass, Mrs. Wilkins was saying. You'd think a barren widow would have more sense than to set her cap for Jacob Sullivan. What use would he have for a woman who can't give him children? Olivia froze, her hand halfway to a bag of flour on the shelf. The words sliced through her like a physical blow, reopening old wounds she'd thought had at least partially healed. Before she could react, Jacob's voice cut through the store, cold and sharp as a knife. Mrs. Wilkins, in the future, you might want to ensure the subject of your gossip isn't within earshot, though I suspect you knew exactly what you were doing. The store fell silent. Mrs. Wilkins had the grace to look momentarily abashed, though she quickly recovered. I was merely expressing concern. You were being cruel, Jacob interrupted, and I won't stand for it. Mrs. Matthews has shown more courage and determination than most people in this town, yourself included. She deserves respect, not ridicule. He turned to Olivia, who was standing motionless, torn between humiliation and gratitude. Are you ready? He asked gently. I believe we've finished our business here. Outside, Olivia finally found her voice. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. His jaw was set in a hard line. What they said was unforgivable. But true, she said quietly. I am barren. Everyone knows it. Frank told enough people when he'd had too much to drink. Jacob's expression darkened further. Frank Matthews was a fool who didn't deserve you, and those women in there, they're scared. Scared. Of what? Of a woman who doesn't need a man to survive. Of someone who refuses to be defined by what she lacks rather than what she has. He took a step closer. You're stronger than all of them put together, Olivia. That's why they talk, because they can't understand you. For a moment they stood there, eyes locked, something unspoken passing between them. Then the store door opened and the spell was broken. The ride back to her homestead was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Jacob helped her down and unloaded her supplies. About the harvest fair, he said as he was preparing to leave. Think about entering, not for them, but for yourself. I'll consider it, she replied, though she wasn't sure she meant it. That night, Olivia lay awake long after she should have been asleep, replaying the day's events in her mind. The cruelty of the women in town stung, as it always did, but it was Jacob's defense of her that occupied most of her thoughts. No one had ever stood up for her that way, not even Frank. In the weeks that followed, Olivia threw herself into her garden with renewed determination. To her amazement and delight, the plants not only survived but thrived. The pumpkin vines sprawled across the ground, producing plump, orange globes that grew larger each day. The butternut squash proved equally successful, their pale tan skins glowing in the summer sun. Jacob continued to visit, offering advice when asked, but mostly just providing quiet company. Sometimes they would work side by side, weeding or watering, talking about everything and nothing: his cattle, her cheese making attempts, the weather, books they'd read. Other times they would simply sit on her porch as the day ended, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky. Olivia found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about Jacob's steady presence that calmed the restlessness inside her, the feeling of inadequacy that had dogged her since she realized she would never bear a child. One evening in late August, as the harvest fair drew near, Jacob arrived with an unusual request. I'd like you to come see something at my ranch, he said. If you're willing. Curious, Olivia agreed. She hadn't been to Jacob's property since he'd bought it 3 years ago, shortly before Frank's death. He helped her onto his horse, and they rode the 3 miles to his ranch in companionable silence. As they crested a small hill, his homestead came into view, a modest but well-built house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. But what caught Olivia's attention was the extensive garden behind the house, at least triple the size of her own. You never mentioned you had such a garden, she said as they dismounted. Jacob looked almost embarrassed. Never seemed relevant to our conversations. He led her through rows of corn, beans, tomatoes, and more vegetables than she could identify at first glance. At the far end stood several beehives, buzzing with activity. "This is amazing," Olivia breathed. "You've done all this yourself, mostly, hired help for the big plantings." He gestured toward a small table and chairs set up under an apple tree. "Would you like some tea? It's cooling over there." They sat in the shade, drinking tea sweetened with honey from his own hives, while Jacob explained his approach to farming. "My father taught me that you have to work with the land, not against it," he said. "Took me years to figure out what that meant here. This soil isn't like back east where I grew up." "You never talk about your family," Olivia observed. "Are they still in the east?" A shadow crossed his face. "They're gone. Fever took my parents and sister when I was 20. That's partly why I came west. Too many memories." "I'm sorry." She understood loss all too well. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but that's why." He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Why what?" "Why I understand a little bit about being alone, about people expecting you to just move on and build a new life as if the old one never mattered." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. That was exactly how she'd felt after Frank died, not that she'd mourned him deeply, their marriage having grown cold long before his death, but she'd mourned the life she'd thought she would have. "Jacob," she began, not quite sure what she wanted to say, "why have you been so kind to me?" "The truth, please." He looked at her directly, his expression open and honest. "Because from the first time I saw you working that garden alone, I recognized something in you, a determination not to be beaten by circumstance. I admired it, still do. That's all." She pressed, sensing there was more. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he finally admitted, "that's not all, but you're not ready to hear the rest, and I'm not sure I'm ready to say it." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, thrilling and terrifying all at once. Olivia looked away, her cheeks warm. "The harvest fair is in 2 weeks," she said, changing the subject. "I've been thinking about what you said about entering." His face brightened. "And I'm going to do it with the pumpkins. They're the best of what I've grown." "They're magnificent," he agreed. "You could win, you know," she laughed. "Let's not get carried away. I'll be happy just to have something worth showing. Either way, I'll be there to see it." The promise in those simple words stayed with Olivia all the way home, warming her from the inside out. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Olivia carefully tended her pumpkins, selecting the 3 finest specimens for the fair. Jacob helped her build a small display stand, and together they worked out how to transport the heavy vegetables safely to town. The day before the fair, he arrived with his wagon specially outfitted with hay to cushion the pumpkins for the journey. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked as they loaded the largest pumpkin, which weighed at least 30 pounds. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. "Though I still think this is madness." "The best kind of madness," he grinned. "The kind that proves you're alive." That night, Olivia barely slept. She kept imagining the townspeople's reactions. Would they laugh at her attempt? Would her pumpkins seem pathetic compared to those grown by more experienced farmers? By the time dawn broke, she had nearly talked herself out of going. But then she thought of Jacob's unwavering belief in her, and she knew she couldn't disappoint him or herself. She donned her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned up her chestnut hair with trembling fingers. Jacob arrived exactly when he'd promised, his wagon ready. He dressed up as well, wearing a clean shirt and his good waistcoat. When he saw her, he paused, his expression softening. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The ride to town was both too long and too short. Olivia's stomach was in knots by the time they reached Snake River, which was bustling with activity. The main street had been transformed, with stalls and displays set up in front of the stores and in the small town square. Jacob helped her unload her pumpkins and arrange them on the display stand they'd built. All around them, other farmers were setting up their own entries: enormous cabbages, perfect tomatoes, apples so red they almost glowed. "Mrs. Matthews," a voice called, and Olivia turned to see Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, approaching. I didn't know you were entering this year. First time for everything, Olivia replied, bracing herself for a snide comment, but Mrs. Peterson surprised her. Well, those are fine-looking pumpkins. Best of luck to you. Throughout the morning, Olivia stood beside her display, accepting compliments and answering questions about her growing methods. To her amazement, most people seemed genuinely impressed with her entry. Didn't think you had it in you, old Mr. Johnson commented, tapping one of the pumpkins appreciatively. Good firm skin, nice color. You might have a knack for this after all. Jacob stayed close by, occasionally stepping away to view other displays but always returning to her side. Around midday, the judges Mr. Peterson, Pastor Williams, and the mayor began making their rounds, examining each entry carefully and making notes on small pads of paper. When they reached Olivia's display, she held her breath. The mayor, a portly man with an impressive mustache, lifted one of her pumpkins, testing its weight. Grown these yourself, Mrs. Matthews? He asked. Yes, sir, on my homestead. First year growing pumpkins, first year growing anything successfully, she admitted. The pastor nodded. Impressive for a first attempt, very impressive indeed. They moved on, and Olivia released the breath she'd been holding. That wasn't so bad, she murmured to Jacob. They know quality when they see it, he replied. As the afternoon wore on, the judges retreated to the town hall to make their decisions. The townspeople milled about, enjoying the food and drink being sold at various stalls, examining the handicrafts and preserves on display in another section of the fair. Olivia noticed Mrs. Wilkins and her circle giving her display a wide berth, though she caught them glancing her way more than once. She straightened her shoulders and refused to be intimidated. You know, Jacob said quietly, whatever happens with the judging, you've already won. She looked at him quizzically. How do you figure that? Look around. People who wouldn't give you the time of day last month are talking to you, admiring what you've grown. You've changed how they see you. Before she could respond, a bell rang, signaling that the judges were ready to announce the winners. The crowd gathered in front of the town hall steps, where the mayor stood with a sheet of paper in his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we've seen some fine entries this year. Snake River can be proud of its farmers and craftspeople. He proceeded to announce winners in various categories: best corn, best beans, best preserves, and so on. Olivia listened with half an ear, not really expecting to hear her name. And now for the vegetable category, the mayor continued. Third prize goes to Mr. Erickson for his carrots. There was polite applause as Mr. Erickson, a Norwegian immigrant who farmed west of town, stepped forward to collect his ribbon. Second prize goes to Mrs. Johnson for her cabbage. More applause. Olivia began to relax, knowing the pumpkin category would be announced separately. First prize in vegetables, the mayor paused dramatically, goes to Mrs. Olivia Matthews for her exceptional pumpkins. For a moment, Olivia thought she'd misheard. It was only when Jacob squeezed her arm and people turned to look at her that she realized it was true. Go on, Jacob urged, gently pushing her forward. In a daze, she made her way to the steps. The mayor handed her a blue ribbon and a small envelope. Congratulations, Mrs. Matthews, he said warmly. A well-deserved win. Thank you, she managed, still not quite believing it. As she turned to face the crowd, she saw a mix of expressions: surprise, admiration, and yes, a few sour looks from Mrs. Wilkins and her friends. But it was Jacob's face she sought out, finding him beaming with pride at the edge of the crowd. Later, as the fair began to wind down, Jacob found her still standing by her display, fingering the blue ribbon in disbelief. I knew you could do it, he said softly. I never would have tried without your encouragement, she admitted. The seeds, the advice, the belief, it was all you. He shook his head. The seeds wouldn't have grown without your care, the advice wouldn't have mattered if you hadn't worked so hard, and as for belief, he took a deep breath. I believed in you because I saw what was already there, Olivia. All I did was remind you to see it too. The way he said her name made her heart flutter. They stood there, surrounded by the noise and bustle of the fair, yet somehow in a world of their own. There's something I need to tell you, Jacob said finally, something I've been wanting to say for a while now. Yes. She prompted when he hesitated. I care for you, Olivia, more than as a neighbor or a friend. The words came out in a rush. I think I started falling for you the first time I saw you out there working your garden, refusing to give up even when everyone said you should. And every day since then, I've found more reasons to admire you, to want to be near you." Olivia stared at him, speechless. A part of her had suspected, hoped even, but hearing it said aloud was overwhelming. "You don't have to say anything," he continued when she remained silent. "I know it might be too soon after Frank, or you might not feel the same way. I just couldn't keep it to myself any longer. Jacob," she finally found her voice. I care for you too, but there are things you should consider. I can't give you children, you know that." His expression softened. "Do you think that matters to me? Olivia, I want you, your spirit, your determination, your heart. Whether or not we have children doesn't change how I feel about you. People will talk," she warned. "Let them." He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "They've been talking about us since I started visiting your homestead. Might as well give them something real to talk about." A smile tugged at her lips. "You're impossible." "Impossibly in love with you," he corrected, and the simple honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "I need time," she said softly. "This is all happening so fast. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." As summer turned to autumn, Olivia and Jacob's relationship deepened. He continued to visit her homestead, helping with harvesting the rest of her garden and preparing for winter. They often had dinner together, sometimes at her place, sometimes at his, talking late into the evening about their hopes and dreams. Olivia learned that Jacob had always wanted to expand his farm to include an orchard, while she shared her desire to try her hand at growing flowers, not just vegetables but beautiful things that served no purpose except to bring joy. "Beauty is its own purpose," Jacob had said. "Like you. Beautiful and purposeful all at once." Such words still made her blush, but she was growing more comfortable with his open admiration and affection. The way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever seen, was healing wounds she hadn't realized were still raw. In town, attitudes toward Olivia were slowly changing. Her blue ribbon had earned her a new respect among many of the townspeople. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had always been polite but distant, now engaged her in genuine conversation when she came to the store. Only Mrs. Wilkins and a few others continued to snipe behind her back, but Olivia found their barbs no longer cut as deeply. "Their opinion of me doesn't define me," she told Jacob one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "I think I finally understand that." He smiled, taking her hand in his. "Wisdom and beauty. I'm a lucky man to know you, Olivia Matthews." "To know me," she teased. "Is that all you want?" His expression grew serious. "You know it's not, but I promised you time and I meant it." She studied their intertwined fingers, his large, tanned hand engulfing her smaller one. Over the past few months, she'd come to treasure these moments of connection, the casual touches that sent sparks of warmth through her body. "Jacob," she said slowly, "I think I've had enough time." He went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, that I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." The words, once spoken, felt right, as if they'd been waiting inside her all along. His face lit up with such joy that it took her breath away. "I love you too, Olivia. More than I have words to express." He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her time to pull back if she wished. Instead, she closed the distance between them, meeting his kiss with a certainty that surprised them both. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss sweet and unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. When they finally parted, Olivia felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her, a piece falling into place that she hadn't known was missing. "Marry me," Jacob whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Be my wife, my partner in everything. Let me wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Snake River. Pastor Williams officiated, and to Olivia's surprise, many townspeople attended, offering genuine congratulations and well wishes. "Never seen a bride glow like that," Mrs. Peterson commented to her husband as they watched Jacob and Olivia exchange vows. "Makes you think there might be something to marrying for love rather than practicality." Even Mrs. Wilkins managed a tight-lipped smile when Olivia caught her eye during the reception held at the town hall. "Don't worry about her," Jacob murmured when he noticed Olivia's gaze. "Nothing she says or thinks can touch us today." They began their married life on Jacob's ranch, which was larger and better established than Olivia's homestead. They decided to keep her property as well, with plans to eventually expand Jacob's farming operation to include both pieces of land. Their first winter as husband and wife passed in a blur of happiness for Olivia. She discovered that Jacob was a thoughtful, generous lover who took as much pleasure in her satisfaction as his own. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be truly desired, truly cherished by a man who saw her exactly as she was and loved every part of her. By spring, they had established a comfortable routine. Jacob tended to his cattle and the larger farming operations, while Olivia managed the household, the garden, and the small dairy they had started with her 2 cows and 3 more that Jacob had purchased. She had also begun experimenting with flower gardening, carving out a small plot near the house where she planted the seeds Jacob had given her as a wedding present: lilies, peonies, daisies, and more. "A garden just for beauty," he'd said when he presented her with the carefully labeled packets. "Because you deserve beautiful things in your life." As the weather warmed, Olivia found herself feeling unusually tired. At first, she attributed it to the increased workload of spring planting, but when the fatigue persisted and was joined by morning nausea, a wild, impossible hope began to form. She said nothing to Jacob, not wanting to raise hopes only to have them dashed again. But after weeks of symptoms that couldn't be ignored, she finally visited the doctor in town while Jacob was away on a cattle drive. Dr. Lewis, a kindly older man who had been in Snake River for decades, confirmed what she hardly dared believe. "You're about 3 months along, Mrs. Sullivan," he told her with a gentle smile. "The baby should arrive in late November." "But that's impossible," Olivia whispered, her hand going instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I was married before for 5 years and never." "The human body is a mysterious thing," Dr. Lewis said. "Sometimes conditions change, or perhaps your previous husband was the one with the difficulty. Either way, you are most definitely expecting a child." Olivia walked home in a daze, her mind racing with the implications. A baby. After all those years of heartache and disappointment, of being whispered about and pitied, she was going to have a child. Jacob's child. Jacob was due back the next day, and Olivia spent the evening preparing a special dinner to welcome him home and to share her miraculous news. She baked his favorite apple pie, roasted a chicken, and set the table with the good china they usually saved for special occasions. When she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, she smoothed her dress and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly nervous. What if Jacob had changed his mind about wanting children? What if he wasn't ready? But the moment he walked through the door and saw her, his face lit up with such love that all her doubts vanished. "This is quite a welcome," he said, taking in the table set for dinner. "What's the occasion?" "I have something to tell you," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. He set down his hat and crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "What is it, love? You're practically glowing." "Jacob," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I'm going to have a baby, our baby." For a moment, he simply stared at her as if he couldn't comprehend her words. Then his eyes widened and he let out a whoop of joy that startled both of them. "A baby, you're sure?" When she nodded, he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Olivia, that's wonderful. How, when?" she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "The how is something I thought you understood quite well, Mr. Sullivan. As for when, Dr. Lewis says late November." He set her down gently, his hands moving to cradle her face. "I thought." "I mean, you always said you couldn't." "I thought so too. I still can't believe it's real." She placed her hands over his. "Are you happy about this? Truly?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia, when I married you, I meant what I said. I wanted you, with or without children. But knowing we're going to have a baby together," he shook his head in wonder. "It's more than I ever dared hope for." He knelt down suddenly, pressing a gentle kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "Your mama and papa can't wait to meet you." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she watched him. This was the man who had believed in her when no one else did, who had seen value in her beyond her ability to bear children, who had loved her completely and without reservation. And now, somehow, they were going to have a family together. Word of Olivia's pregnancy spread quickly through Snake River, causing no small amount of surprise. Most people were genuinely happy for the couple, offering congratulations and advice whenever they saw them in town, even Mrs. Wilkins seemed taken aback, her usual snippy comments silenced by the evidence that she had been wrong about Olivia all along. "I suppose miracles do happen," was all she could manage when she encountered Olivia at the general store one day. "Yes, they do," Olivia agreed, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "Sometimes when you least expect them." As her pregnancy progressed, Olivia found herself embraced by a community of women eager to share their knowledge and experience. Mrs. Peterson organized a quilting circle specifically to make a baby blanket, and even women who had previously avoided Olivia now sought her out. "It's like I've finally been admitted to some secret society," she told Jacob one evening as they sat on their porch. "As if I wasn't a real woman until now." He frowned. "That's not right. You've always been a complete person, baby or no baby. I know that now." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "You taught me that, but for so long I defined myself by what I lacked rather than what I had. And now?" He asked, his arm tightening around her. "Now I know better." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach where their child was kicking vigorously. "This baby is a miracle and a blessing, but even without him or her, I would still be whole, still be loved, still be enough." Jacob's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he kissed her temple. "You've always been more than enough, Olivia Sullivan, always." The harvest fair came again in September, and despite being 7 months pregnant, Olivia insisted on entering. This time, she submitted not only pumpkins, but also preserves jars of apple butter and peach jam that she had put up over the summer. To no one's surprise, she won blue ribbons in both categories. "Seems you've found your calling," the mayor commented as he presented her with the ribbons. "Snake River is fortunate to have such a talented farmer in our midst." As they walked away from the presentation, Jacob squeezed her hand. "How does it feel to be the town's champion 2 years running?" she laughed. "Vindicating, but you know what feels even better. The fact that I don't need their approval anymore. I know my own worth now." He stopped, turning to face her. "Have I told you lately how much I love you?" "Only about a dozen times today," she teased, "but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Olivia Sullivan," he said, his voice low and fervent. "More today than yesterday, and I suspect less than tomorrow." In late November, just as Dr. Lewis had predicted, Olivia went into labor. Jacob sent one of his ranch hands to fetch the doctor while he stayed by her side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping the sweat from her brow, and whispering words of encouragement. After 14 hours of labor, their son was born a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's brown eyes. "He's perfect," Jacob whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with a mixture of awe and terror. "Absolutely perfect. What shall we call him?" Olivia asked, exhausted but radiant with joy. Jacob thought for a moment. "How about Samuel, after my father?" "Samuel Sullivan," she tested the name, smiling when the baby seemed to respond to the sound. "I think he approves, Doctor." Lewis pronounced both mother and child in excellent health before taking his leave, promising to check on them again the next day. That night, as Olivia dozed with Samuel nestled against her chest, she felt Jacob sit beside her on the bed. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" she murmured, not opening her eyes. "For everything. For not giving up on your garden that day when I first brought you seeds. For believing in yourself enough to enter the fair. For loving me. For giving me a son." His voice broke on the last word. "For making me the happiest man in Wyoming Territory." She opened her eyes then, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You're the one who taught me to believe in myself again, who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I should be thanking you." He leaned down to kiss her gently. "Let's agree to be grateful for each other then, and for this little miracle." As if on cue, Samuel made a small snuffling sound, his tiny fist waving in the air. Jacob caught it with one finger, marveling at the perfect miniature fingers that wrapped around his own. "I never thought I could love someone I just met so completely," he whispered, "but I would die for him without hesitation." "Let's hope that won't be necessary," Olivia said with a small laugh. "I rather like having you around." By the time Samuel's first birthday approached, Olivia had established herself as one of the most successful small farmers in the Snake River area. Her preserves were sought after not just locally, but in neighboring towns as well, and she had begun experimenting with different varieties of vegetables, determined to find ones that thrived in the challenging Wyoming soil. Jacob had expanded their operation, hiring 2 full-time hands to help with the cattle and crops. They had also begun work on a small orchard, planting apple and cherry trees that would take years to mature, but would eventually provide another source of income and joy for the family. Olivia's former homestead had been converted primarily to growing flowers, which she sold in town during the summer months. What had started as a personal pleasure had turned into a surprisingly profitable sideline, as the women of Snake River discovered the delight of having fresh-cut flowers in their homes. Who would have thought people would pay good money for something that just looks pretty? Jacob marveled one evening as Olivia counted the day's earnings from her flower stand. "Beauty feeds the soul," she replied. "And goodness knows, life out here can be hard enough that a little beauty goes a long way." Samuel was growing into a happy, curious toddler with his father's easy smile and his mother's determination. He had recently taken his first wobbly steps and was now attempting to toddle after Jacob everywhere he went, much to his father's delight. "He's going to be a rancher like his pa," Jacob often said proudly when Samuel showed interest in the animals. "Or perhaps a gardener like his mama," Olivia would counter when the boy spent hours playing in the dirt beside her as she worked. "Or both," Jacob would concede. "He can be anything he sets his mind to." The week of Samuel's birthday, as Olivia was preparing for the small celebration they had planned, she realized she had been feeling unusually tired again, and nauseous in the mornings, and her dresses were feeling tighter around the waist. With a mixture of shock and joy, she realized she was pregnant again. This time, when she told Jacob, they wept together tears of happiness and gratitude for a life that had become so much richer than either of them had dared to imagine. "2 miracles," Jacob kept saying, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "We've been blessed twice over." Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born the following spring, a delicate, fair-haired baby with her mother's blue eyes and a determined little chin. "She's going to be stubborn, this one, Doctor," Lewis predicted with a chuckle as the newborn gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Just like her mama." "God help us all," Jacob laughed, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. As the years passed, the Sullivan farm prospered, as did their family. To everyone's continued amazement, including Olivia's, she gave birth to a 3rd child, another boy they named Michael, when Samuel was 5 and Elizabeth was 3. 3 children, Mrs. Wilkins marveled to Mrs. Bennett at church one Sunday, not bothering to lower her voice as Olivia passed by with her brood. "And to think we all thought she was barren." Olivia, who might once have been hurt by the comment, merely smiled. "Life is full of surprises, isn't it, Mrs. Wilkins?" One should never be too quick to judge what's possible. By the time the children were old enough for school, Olivia and Jacob had established one of the most successful farms in the county. Their produce consistently won prizes at the annual fair, and Jacob's cattle operation had grown considerably. They had built a larger house to accommodate their family, though the original homestead remained special to both of them, the place where their journey together had begun. On the 10th anniversary of the day Jacob had first brought her seeds for her garden, he surprised her with a special gift, a small silver pendant in the shape of a pumpkin. "To remember where we started," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "with one act of faith." "Your faith in me," she said softly, touching the pendant. "No," he corrected her. "My recognition of what was already there, you just needed someone to see it." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Samuel, now a lanky 10-year-old, Elizabeth a spirited 8-year-old, and Michael a mischievous 5-year-old, Olivia felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it, love?" Jacob asked, noticing her emotion. "I was just thinking about how different my life might have been," she replied. "If you hadn't stopped that day, if you hadn't believed in me when no one else did, including myself." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You would have found your way eventually. You're too strong not to have." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful I didn't have to do it alone." "You'll never be alone again," he promised. "Not as long as I have breath in my body." As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors as the day he'd first given her those seeds, Olivia leaned against the man who had taught her to believe in second chances. Around them, their children's laughter rang out like music, and in the distance, their fields stretched green and promising under the evening sky. From barren earth she had cultivated abundance. From loneliness she had harvested love. And in the eyes of the man beside her, she had always been enough exactly as she was.